Hi, Joshua Schreck, National Parliamentarian. Today we'll discuss the vote of the presiding officer. Here's a common parliamentary procedure question I get from members at all levels. Can the presiding officer vote? Robert's Rules gives us some preliminary help on this type of participation with a vague yes, but only sometimes. I'd like to take this a step further by addressing some specific circumstances and what-ifs. But before I tell you about the presiding officer's voting, you should know that an underlying principle here is impartiality. The presiding officer has the same right to vote as everyone else, but Robert's Rules likes the presiding officer to convey neutrality to the members so that no member feels slighted or has any reason to question whether fundamental members' rights are being honored. In no case should the presiding officer abuse their position to influence the business or disenfranchise the body. Remember, the presiding officer is a servant to the body and should convey neutrality. The presiding officer can always vote in a smaller board or committee. Small boards and committees, as an example, under 12 people, get to relax Robert's Rules a bit. If you're in one of these types of groups, the presiding officer can always vote. The presiding officer can always vote if the vote is a secret. If you're using a secret ballot or anonymous voting, the impartiality issue is gone, and the presiding officer can vote. The presiding officer can always vote if that individual vote would affect the results. Here's the rule. If the presiding officer vote would make a difference on whether a motion passes or fails, the presiding officer can vote. But the presiding officer doesn't have to vote in this instance. And here's the same principle again. When one vote makes a difference, Robert's Rules cares a little less about the air of impartiality. Here are 3 examples of legal presiding officer participation in a close vote and the results impacted. A motion is on the floor to renovate the post kitchen. The motion needs a majority of those present and voting to pass. Example 1. Without the presiding officer's vote, there are 50 votes in the affirmative and 50 votes in the negative. Unless the presiding officer votes, the motion will not pass. A tied vote on a motion means the motion fails. The presiding officer thinks, food's pretty important stuff. Anything to do with kitchen, I'm in. So the presiding officer votes yes. The new totals are 51 votes in the affirmative and 50 in the negative. The vote passes. Example 2. Without the presiding officer's vote, there are 51 votes in the affirmative and 50 votes in the negative. Unless the presiding officer votes, the motion will pass. The presiding officer thinks, we could really use that money to restripe the parking lot. And I'm all about practicality. Food can wait. So the presiding officer votes no. Now the total votes are 51 in the affirmative and 51 in the negative. Because a tied vote is not a passing vote, the motion fails. Finally, example 3. There are 51 votes in the affirmative and 50 votes in the negative. Unless the presiding officer votes, the motion will pass. The presiding officer thinks, people might judge me if I vote in the affirmative and hijack the kitchen renovation. I'll just be quiet. So the presiding officer abstains. This means the totals don't change. There are still 51 votes in the affirmative and 50 votes in the negative. The motion is adopted. So if you're the presiding officer of your post, district, or department, use your voting power carefully. And in the back of your mind, do prioritize impartiality as an important aspect of wise leadership. Now you know when the presiding officer can vote. Let's keep learning together.